It started with silence. Not the kind that slams into you, but the slow kind. The kind that seeps in unnoticed. Like water curling beneath a closed door. It was a quiet Wednesday morning in Manhattan when I realized something was off. I wasn't copied on the investor call thread. Subject line: Q3 Capital Strategy Brief, Final. I blinked at the screen. 21 years. That's how long I'd been with Nexora Systems. There wasn't a single capital call, strategic session, or investor deck I hadn't built, led, or rewritten from scratch. And now, this? No invite, no mention, nothing. At first, I thought maybe someone had forgotten. Threads get messy, but when I searched the internal calendar, the meeting was marked private. My stomach tightened. I didn't say anything. I just watched, listened, waited. No one said a word, not my team. Not Darren, not even Kelly from Investor Relations, who used to run every word by me. Then a Slack message blinked onto my screen. It was Sophie, the intern I mentored years ago. Violet, they're with the board and new investors. Your name's not coming up. I stared at it, frozen. That's when it hit me. I wasn't stepping back. I was being erased, quietly. I didn't say anything the rest of that day. Not to my team, not to Darren, and definitely not to Kelly. I went through the motions, meetings, reviews, feedback loops, but inside, I felt like I was holding my breath underwater. Something had shifted, and no one wanted to say it out loud. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like static, white noise buzzing behind my eyes. My thoughts kept looping back to that moment. Sophie's message. The way she'd phrased it. Gentle but sharp. Your name's not coming up. By morning, I had half convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was a reason I wasn't included. Maybe they just wanted me to review it after the draft was finalized. At exactly 9 a.m., a calendar notification popped up. Catch up, Violet, Darren, HR, Conference A. No agenda, no attachments, just 20 minutes blocked off. Something in me whispered, don't go. But I did. I always showed up, even when the room felt wrong. I walked into Conference A with my notebook in hand. Instinctively, like I always did, but I didn't need it. There was nothing to write. Darren was already seated, slicked back hair, navy suit, no tie, his serious but casual look. Beside him sat a woman from HR I didn't recognize, cool expression. No smile. Violet, thanks for making time, Darren said, his voice too composed. He folded his hands like we were about to review quarterly projections. I sat down. My chest was tight, but I said nothing. Then came the sentence. We're letting you go. Just like that. No warning. No discussion. No performance review. Just a flat, well-rehearsed line delivered like a memo. I blinked. I opened my mouth to speak. But no words came. Everything I'd built, every late night, every investor win, every pitch written on the back of a boarding pass, just gone. Replaced by silence. Darren kept going, his voice clipped and almost relieved. After reviewing strategic direction with the board and aligning our leadership layer for the next phase of growth, we've decided to make changes that impact your role. HR slid a sealed envelope toward me. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't meet my eyes. The letter had been signed yesterday. They knew. They had planned this. Before Sophie messaged me. Before the meeting invite was even sent. Effective immediately, Darren added. Like that made it cleaner. Security can assist you if needed. If needed. Like I was going to flip a table. But I didn't. For the first time in my career. I didn't speak. I didn't defend. I just sat there. Completely still. Not calm. Numb. 3 minutes. That's how long it took to erase 21 years. I stood, envelope in hand, and walked out, not from pride, from shock. No one looked up. Not Jasmine from analytics, who always waved when I walked by. Not Charles from legal, who once called me the spine of the company. Not even the new receptionist I'd trained last quarter. Everyone knew. Back in my office, if I could still call it that. I opened the glass door with my name still etched in silver. Violet Anders, SVP Strategic Partnerships. It glinted under the lights like it didn't know the truth yet. I stood there for a moment. Frozen. Then, like I was afraid to wake something, I moved, slow, Mechanical. I pulled out a file box from beneath my desk. Started packing without thinking. A framed photo from our first product launch. The bonsai tree from a Tokyo investor. My worn-out notebook. The one where I'd written our first pricing model at 38,000 feet over Seattle. Each item weighed more than it should have. Then I heard footsteps. I turned. Sophie stood in the doorway, small, pale, eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. "They really did it," she whispered. I nodded, swallowing hard. My throat burned. "They didn't even let me speak," I said softly. Sophie stepped inside. "I don't understand. You built this place. Darren was your intern. I've seen the photos." I forced a smile. "Things change." Her eyes welled. Before I could stop her, she crossed the room and hugged me. It was brief, but it was the only human warmth I'd felt all day. "They're in the main conference room now," she murmured, pitching the new direction. That hit harder than the firing itself. I followed her out, the box in my arms, still half full. As I passed the glass wall of conference room B, I froze. On the giant projector screen was a slide I knew better than my own reflection. Client retention through trust infrastructure. My slide, my framework, my face. They had cropped the photo, changed the font, but it was me. Taken last fall in Boston. Me speaking to a room of 600. Explaining why client loyalty isn't just about data, it's about relationships. And there stood Darren, pointer in hand, pitching my strategy like it was his. I turned away, heart pounding. Back in my office, Sophie followed silently. Her voice broke. "I didn't think they'd. I'm sorry." I shook my head. "It's not your fault." And then, quietly, I said the truth out loud for the first time. They didn't want a builder. They wanted a symbol they could replace. She looked at me, really looked at me. "Will you fight this?" I stared down at the envelope. Then at the door I'd just walked through. "No," I said, "not yet." And I meant it, because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. I didn't leave that day. Not really. My box sat on the desk, closed but untouched. My badge no longer worked. My title no longer meant anything. But somehow, I couldn't walk out. Instead, I sat back in the chair that had shaped my days for 2 decades. Not out of defiance, just stillness, the kind that happens when your body moves but your soul hasn't caught up yet. I stared at the corkboard across the room. Colored pins, blue for renewals, red for expansions, green for acquisitions, dozens of them, clustered like constellations. Companies I had brought in personally. Contracts I had fought tooth and nail to secure. And then I looked at the whiteboard. Still smudged from a strategy session 2 weeks ago. In the center, faint but visible, was the original pricing matrix I created years ago. The formula had been tweaked since, but the soul of it? Mine. I stood, walked over, and touched the board gently, as if it could feel me missing it. Then I sat down at my computer. I wasn't sure why. I expected my access to be revoked. But the screen unlocked. Muscle memory guided me to the backend systems. I clicked through to our infrastructure hub, Lint Core. The API route. The beating heart of the product. It was live, functional, still mine. I clicked permissions. My name wasn't listed on the active roster. Darren and 2 unfamiliar VPs had taken over admin. But then, deeper in the legacy archive, there it was. Primary system owner, Violet Anders. Access level, full. Root. Gen 1. I froze. They had forgotten. They didn't know this layer even existed. It wasn't visible unless you built it. I leaned back slowly. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel angry. I just felt present. For the first time since the meeting, I felt my pulse return to my fingertips. I hadn't been erased. Not from the code. Not from the core. They had replaced my name on the doors. But the bones of this place still knew me. I backed up the permissions archive. Encrypted it. Saved it to a private drive. Not for revenge. For leverage. Control. Options. That evening, I sat in the same spot I had occupied for so many years. Watching the sky outside darken. I could still hear echoes of late-night meetings. Laughs from boardroom victories. Quiet moments spent solving impossible problems before dawn. I thought about the people who never saw those hours. Who only saw the results. Never the cost. They would inherit the numbers, but never the weight behind them. My phone buzzed. A Slack ping. Sophie. Again. Sophie. 2:07 p.m. Violet. Someone from Blackmere Capital just called. He asked for you by name. Said your direct line's not working. I told him you weren't in the office today. He went quiet. I stared at the message. Blackmere. I'd closed that deal myself. Flown to Singapore. Sat across from their partner over handmade ramen. Drawing out security models on a napkin. They hadn't just invested in Nexora. They had trusted me. And now they were asking where I was. Not who replaced me. Where I was. That kind of question only comes when your absence means something. I opened the shared investor documentation portal from my personal device. I didn't expect access, but it let me in. And there it was. Lead Relationship Manager. Violet Anders. Contact. violet.anders@nexora.com. Status. Active. They hadn't updated it. They erased me internally, but left my name standing where it mattered most. To the people who wrote the checks. I nearly laughed. They thought trust was transferable. That relationships could be reassigned, like calendar invites. But trust doesn't move with titles. It follows people, and mine had just lit up a signal fire I didn't even mean to send. That night, I didn't plan to answer my phone. But at 8:42 p.m., it rang. Kazuo Yamamoto, Blackmere Capital. I hadn't spoken to him in months. He never called unannounced. I answered. Violet, he said, his voice low, measured. Apologies for reaching out after hours. May I speak plainly? I stood, heart suddenly still. Of course. There was a pause. They told me you left voluntarily. He said, stepped down to explore other priorities. Is that true? I turned toward the window. The city glowed under street lamps below. No, I said softly. That's not true. Another pause. I see. He didn't ask why. Kazuo never asked questions he already knew the answers to. But I could feel him reassembling the facts behind the silence. I reviewed the Q3 forecast. He continued. Your signature wasn't on it. You signed every model we ever funded. So I asked. I didn't speak. There's something you may not be aware of. He said carefully. Clause 7.2. In the revised Blackmere Agreement. The continuity clause. I blinked. My pulse jumped. Clause 7.2? It states that if the primary architect of the platform is removed without consultation, we reserve the right to withdraw funding without penalty. I swallowed. I didn't negotiate that final version. I whispered. Darren and legal took over. You remained listed under Exhibit B, he replied. Key personnel. Non-negotiable. Silence stretched between us. I'm not calling to interfere, Kazuo said, but clarity matters before decisions are made. He didn't have to spell it out. The foundation was cracking, and I had just become the deciding factor in which way the collapse would go. Thank you, I said, barely audible. Kazuo's voice softened. You built something rare, Violet. Some of us still remember who actually built it. Then he hung up. I stood in the dark, staring at the city I had once tried to map, client by client, pitch by pitch. I reached for my laptop, opened an archive folder I had backed up on 2 encrypted drives. Inside it, version 3.2, the contract, the clause I had written when Nexora was still a handful of people in a shared workspace. Building something we believed in. Shared IP ownership. Still active, still unassigned. They thought I was gone. But the land beneath their feet? Still mine. By morning, the weight on my chest hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It was no longer the kind of heaviness that pins you in place. It was the kind that steadies your breath, like a diver just before they break the surface. I sat at my dining table, a mug of black coffee warming my palms. The sun hadn't climbed high enough to reach the window yet. The apartment was still, and for once, I didn't mind the silence. It no longer echoed like absence. It pulsed like focus. Kazuo's voice lingered in my thoughts. You built something rare, not praise, a reminder. For years, I'd let the noise of leadership, of meetings, deliverables, quarterly optics, blur the truth. I had believed in the structure, the mission, the purpose, but somewhere in that belief, I'd forgotten the architecture was mine. That Nexora's heartbeat, the infrastructure, the compliance layers, the relationship scaffolding, still bore my signature. So I opened my laptop. In the private archive, I located the file I needed. Version 3.2, the foundational tech agreement we'd signed in the early days. When we were just 5 scrappy builders in a co-working space with second-hand monitors and too much caffeine. I had drafted it after watching too many founders lose control of what they created. I wasn't going to be one of them. Clause 9.1. All derivative works based on version 3.2 architecture remain under shared IP designation unless explicitly reassigned via board resolution or mutual legal release. There had been no vote. No legal release. Nothing in the files Darren submitted had touched that clause. And yet Lint Core still ran on 3.2. Everything above it, version 3.5, the dashboard upgrades, the reporting skins, was cosmetic. The bones, the compliance engine, the trust logic, all mine. I felt something shift inside me. A subtle straightening of the spine. Not revenge, not rage, just clarity. They had built a tower. Forgetting the foundation still carried my name. That afternoon, I pulled the most recent copy of a major licensing contract from our public-facing data room. I wasn't breaking protocol, I was just looking. Page 6. The licensed core technology, as first introduced in version 3.2, shall be considered essential infrastructure. I nearly laughed. It was like watching someone steal a mansion, unaware you still owned the land it stood on. By then, the calls had begun. Not from Nixora, not yet, but from the outside. The audit group reached out first, calm, discreet, direct. Ms. Anders, this is an informal review request. Off the record, private, representing key stakeholders. I didn't ask who sent them. I already knew. Blackmere, Northbridge, maybe even Agari Holdings. The ones who watched from the wings, quiet, precise, calculating. They didn't move fast. But when they did, it meant something was about to break. I agreed to meet. The room wasn't a boardroom or a lawyer's office. It was a small, neutral co-working space, 4 laptops, a whiteboard, no logos, no names, just people who understood enough to know they didn't understand everything. Thank you for coming, the lead auditor said. He didn't offer his name. I didn't need it. They didn't want scandal. They wanted facts. They handed me a contract, confidential licensing draft, and asked a simple question. Does this look familiar? I scanned the pages. My eyes stopped cold on section 11.4. Lint grants deployment rights of core infrastructure to Origin data systems in exchange for exclusivity. Origin, a third-party analytics firm I had flagged years ago for compliance gaps and shady reverse engineering tactics. I had explicitly warned Darren, never give them back-end access. Yet there it was, a draft, signed last week, no board sign-off, no legal review from compliance. Most importantly, no release from me. They hadn't just moved recklessly. They had violated the foundation. Clause 9.1 wasn't just technical. It was ethical, and they broke it. Does the board know about this? I asked, keeping my voice even. The auditor didn't answer. He didn't have to. For the first time in days, I felt something close to calm. I wasn't fighting a system anymore. I was the system. I stood, gathered my notes, and headed toward the door. One of them stopped me. Ms. Anders, is there anything else you'd like to share? I paused. I turned slightly, met his eyes. What you're building isn't broken, I said, but it's being held by someone who doesn't understand how to protect it. Then I walked out, not triumphant, not bitter, clear. That night, I didn't make any statements. I didn't send dramatic emails or contact old allies. I didn't leak files or threaten action. I did one thing. At 6:31 p.m., I opened LinkedIn. I typed a sentence. No hashtags, no tags, no photos. I was there when trust was built. Now you wonder why it's gone. I hit post, locked my phone, sat back, and let silence do what it does best. Let it echo. By morning, everything had shifted. By the time I finished my morning coffee, the post had traveled further than I expected. I hadn't tagged anyone. I hadn't named the company. But the message carried weight because it didn't need explanation. People felt it. At 10:03 a.m., Sophie sent me a screenshot. Sophie, 10:03 a.m. You broke them. Not kidding. 6 investor calls postponed. Northbridge is asking for contract clarification. Everyone's rattled. I stared at the screen. Then put the phone down. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. Not vindication. It was balance. A quiet return of gravity to the room. They had tried to write me out. Retcon my exit as voluntary. Repurpose my work with no credit. They had thought my silence would stay silent. But I had spoken. Once, and it was enough. That afternoon, my phone lit up again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. No message. 5 minutes later, a new email hit my inbox. Subject: Next chapter. From Amira Bell, Sequoia North. I remembered her. Quiet power. I'd met her once at a roundtable in Austin. She hadn't said much, but she listened like a strategist. Not waiting to respond, waiting to understand. Her message was simple. I've followed your work for years. But more importantly, I've followed your silence this month. If you're open to building something new, something not in response to the past but as a vision for what should come next, we'd like to back it. No pitch needed, just your yes. I read it 3 times. No pitch, just my yes. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't used to decisions that came without decks and board votes and due diligence fire drills. So I took a walk. For the first time in weeks, I breathed freely. No ID badge around my neck. No inbox full of red flags. Just a woman with a choice that wasn't made for her. By 11 a.m., I called Amira. She answered on the first ring. "Violet," she said warmly, "glad you called." Our conversation wasn't transactional. No suits, no documents, just 2 voices. Mine in a sweater, curled up on the couch. Hers in a calm, focused tone that felt like calm water. "The market doesn't just want tech anymore," she said. "It wants leadership, clarity, vision. You've got that, and a track record that speaks louder than any branding strategy." I laughed softly. "I don't even have a name yet. Or a team. That's the beauty of it." Amira said, "We're not backing a company. We're backing you." She didn't offer pressure. She offered space. We agreed to reconnect in a week. All she asked was that I come back with one thing. A sentence. A vision. Not a roadmap. Just truth. That night, I sat by the window. Scribbling on paper. Not slides. Not spreadsheets. Just ink on a page. It wasn't about revenge or disruption. It was about building something where trust wasn't a department, it was the architecture. At 4:30 p.m., my front door buzzed. I opened it to find Sophie standing there with Thai takeout and a hesitant smile. "I figured you probably haven't eaten," she said. She stepped in without waiting for permission. Like she belonged. We ate on the couch, legs folded. Cartons between us. Like those late nights in the early Nixora days. Before things got glossy. Back when we were still figuring it out. After a while, she cleared her throat. "They offered me a promotion," she said, not looking up. I paused. "They want me to run post-investor relations. NDAs, damage control, clean up the mess." I didn't have to ask the catch. They said I'd need to let go of the past. Stay out of internal conversations about your exit. Her voice didn't shake, but it tightened. I set my chopsticks down. "And what do you want, Sophie?" She looked at me then. Eyes clear, no fear. "I want to build something that doesn't make people disposable. I want to work somewhere that remembers who kept the lights on." She smiled, soft and firm. "I want to work with you." That hit harder than any investor call. Because it didn't come with funding. It came with faith. "I don't have a plan yet," I admitted. "Good," she said, "then it can be real." That night, I wrote back to Amira. "I'm in. I've got one person on board. That's all I need to begin." I meant every word. Because freedom isn't just about walking away. It's about choosing who walks with you. The following morning, I returned to the building for the last time, not as an employee. Not as a ghost, but as something else entirely. I arrived at 8:15 a.m. The same hour I used to unlock the front doors and turn on the lights before anyone else showed up. Now, I wore a visitor badge. No ID swipe, no place to sit, and strangely, it didn't hurt. Darren wasn't there. Neither was anyone from the old leadership team. The board had sent a junior associate. A polite face hiding behind policy. He handed me the final equity release paperwork, standard termination language. Tidy and bloodless. I read every word, slowly, Not because I didn't understand it, but because it deserved to be seen before I let it go. Then, I reached into my folder and placed a second envelope on the table. He blinked. "What's this?" "My legal release," I said, calm as stone. "For the legacy code. Version 3.2. His eyes widened. The air in the room shifted. But he nodded and slid the envelope next to the paperwork without another word. The irony wasn't lost on me. They needed me to walk away clean, and I gave them exactly what they asked for on paper. But what I carried out with me couldn't be documented. Vision, reputation, integrity, things no spreadsheet could measure. On the way out, I paused one last time in the hallway. It felt smaller now, like a shell of what it used to be. Maybe I had outgrown it. Or maybe it had shrunk under the weight of its own illusions. In the lobby, I spotted a familiar face, Frances, the front desk coordinator. 10 years and still holding that clipboard like a shield. Her eyes lit up. "Violet," she said, almost surprised. "They told us you might be coming in today. But I didn't believe it. I'm just closing a chapter," I replied. She hesitated, then leaned in a little closer. Her voice low. "A lot of us are glad you didn't disappear." I smiled. "I couldn't," I said. "You don't disappear when you've built something honest. You just change direction." She nodded like she understood more than I gave her credit for. And then, I stepped through the glass doors for the final time. Outside, the morning light was soft and certain. I felt the difference instantly. For weeks, I'd walked those streets with weight on my shoulders. Now, it was behind me. Later that afternoon, I met Sophie at our new office. Well, office was generous. It was a 300-square-foot studio space above a coffee shop. Still smelling of fresh paint and unassembled furniture. The Wi-Fi barely worked, the chairs were folding metal, and we didn't have a printer. But we had a whiteboard. And a name taped to the door. It didn't matter that we were starting with nothing. I had done it once before. But this time, it was different. No board, no politics. No need to translate vision into something palatable for people who didn't understand the cost of building. This time, it would be real. Sophie walked around the room, opening the windows. "It still smells like someone's basement," she said, laughing. "Perfect," I replied. "Most revolutions start in basements." She grinned. "So what now?" I pulled out my notebook and flipped to the first blank page. "Now, we figure out what matters." We didn't draft KPIs or investor hooks. We didn't write a mission statement. We just talked about what it meant to create something rooted in people. Not politics. What it looked like to build a platform where trust wasn't earned quarterly but maintained daily. We mapped our values in dry erase marker. Transparency, ownership, no hidden doors in the system, technical or personal. We talked about our future hires, what kind of culture we'd build. What kind of conversations we'd normalize. What kind of leadership didn't look like control, but confidence. By 6 p.m., the sun had dipped below the skyline. I looked at our work in progress and felt something I hadn't in months. Belonging. Not to a company. To a purpose. Sophie turned to me as she gathered her bag. "Whatever this becomes," she said, "I'm proud to be part of it from the ground floor." I nodded. "We're not building another version of what broke us. We're building what should have existed all along." That night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the city that once made me feel small and now felt entirely open. This wasn't about restoring my title. It wasn't even about the company that let me go. It was about remembering what kind of leader I wanted to be before ambition made me forget. Somewhere along the way, I had started believing that leadership meant protecting the machine, carrying the weight for everyone, making sacrifices no one noticed. But real leadership? It's about building something that doesn't fall apart when you step away. It's about creating a system where people don't have to beg to be seen. I had learned the hard way that loyalty without boundaries isn't strength. It's slow erosion. And I wasn't here to erode anymore. I was here to rise, with intention. And this time, I'd bring others with me. 3 days after we whiteboarded our values, my inbox began to fill again. Not with recruiters or headlines or apologies, but with messages from people who had gone silent weeks ago. Colleagues, former partners, even a few quiet observers I hadn't realized were watching. Most of the messages were simple. I heard what happened. You were the reason I stayed that long. You built more than a company. You built us a compass. But one email stood out. Subject: Vision. It was from Amira. She had promised me space. Now, she was inviting clarity. Her note was short. As always. We don't want a pitch. Just a direction. Where you see the world going. What needs building. Even one sentence. I opened my notebook and looked at the words we had scrawled across the page. Trust isn't a feature. It's a foundation. I typed it back. That was enough. That afternoon, Sophie and I returned to the office. A couple of folding chairs still scattered in the middle of the room. I looked at the blank wall we planned to paint. A blank wall. A blank page. That was freedom. It wasn't about what we'd left. It was about what came next. We didn't have legacy capital. We didn't have a product yet. But we had something rarer. A clean start. Around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a DM from Leah, a quiet voice inside Nexora I hadn't heard from in weeks. Leah, 4:01 p.m. They're still trying to fix the rollout issues. Brad's blaming everything on documentation gaps. Board's not buying it anymore. I stared at her message. Then looked out the window at the city moving in its usual rhythm, impatient. Electric. Unforgiving. That place I left? It was still trying to control a narrative. Still trying to spin performance into vision. But I no longer lived inside that story. And then, Leah followed up. Leah, 4:03 p.m. He said something wild today. That you should have left them better instructions. That you should have anticipated being replaced. I didn't respond. Not because it didn't sting, but because it no longer defined me. What they missed was simple. You don't hand over a map to people who never asked how the ground was laid. They didn't want a guide. They wanted a scapegoat. And when the foundation cracked, they blamed the architect they'd erased. I stood and stretched, shaking the tension from my shoulders. Sophie was sketching wireframe layouts on the whiteboard. You ever think they're going to call? She asked. I considered it. They might, I said, eventually. And if they ask you to come back? I smiled faintly. They're not calling to invite me back. They're calling to stop the bleeding. Sophie nodded. So I won't answer. Not because I wanted revenge. But because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away without turning around. We didn't need their apology. We didn't need their recognition. We had something better. We had truth. And a vision no one could steal. That evening, I posted something new. Just 4 words. The next thing begins. No context. No links. Just presence. And quietly, people began to echo it. Likes turned to shares. Shares turned to DMs. Former engineers, designers, operators, founders, all saying the same thing. If you're building, I want in. I wasn't trying to go viral. But I was becoming visible again, on my terms. A week later, we signed the lease for a bigger space. Nothing flashy. Just 2 rooms, 4 desks, and windows that caught the morning sun. That same week, I heard whispers that the Nexora board had replaced Brad. Not publicly. Just a quiet shift in leadership while they attempted to calm the remaining investors. They never mentioned my name. They couldn't. To do so would be to admit they'd built their castle on a moat they didn't own. But I didn't need the credit. I already had something better. Leverage? Yes. But more importantly, liberation. We weren't trying to be louder. We were trying to be clearer. To build a system that didn't require someone to sacrifice their voice just to be respected. To build infrastructure where integrity wasn't a footnote, it was a feature. And for the first time in months, I slept. Not because the world was fixed, but because I was finally building something that wouldn't ask me to disappear in order to lead it. This was my new beginning. And I would build it wide enough for others to breathe inside it too. I used to believe that loyalty would always protect you. That if you showed up early, stayed late, kept quiet during storms, and carried more than your share, someone would notice. But the truth is, not everyone values the same things. Some companies don't reward loyalty. They exploit it. What I've learned is this. You don't need a title to lead. And you don't need a platform to matter. Power isn't in the room you sit in. It's in the impact you leave behind. And trust? It doesn't fade just because someone edits you out of the story. You build legacy one decision at a time. in silence, in service, in intention. And when it's time to walk away, walk. Don't look back. You're not leaving something behind. You're walking toward who you were always meant to become. Let them wonder. Let the silence echo. And then, start again, with purpose. If you've ever been overlooked, pushed aside, or made to feel replaceable, remember this. Systems fail when they forget the humans who built them. Your worth isn't in your email signature or job title. It's in your integrity, your ideas, and the people who remember the quiet difference you made. Whether you're rebuilding after a loss, starting over, or just learning to trust your voice again, don't let someone else's short-sightedness define your next move. Take your time, reclaim your story, and when you're ready, build something better. Thank you for choosing to listen to this story among thousands of stories out there. Like and subscribe to continue listening to the latest stories.